now, so. Okay, good morning and good Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh Kislev. We are now learning Ayin Beis, volume 2, page 1157, 1158. But we're learning it together with the Frierdiker Rebbe's Hemshech Tzadik Daled, 5694, that he delivered beginning Rosh Hashanah that year, 1933, and we're on page 143, which is basically the Ayin Beis with additions and explanations. Since there have been a whole bunch of new people participating, and we have a special WhatsApp group where we announce in case, like, for example, the last few days there were no classes, and some people asked, how could they know when there's a class or not? So I'm going to ask our distinguished alumni, Dr. Tzvi Lang, to just give the contact info. If you want to join the WhatsApp group, there we post every day's audio. Every class every day is recorded, as well as any updates or interactions about this class, if there's any schedule changes or time and so on. You could obviously also see it at chassidusapplied.com on the YouTube channel. We've been also posting every day. The YouTube goes live as well as recorded afterwards. So Tzvi, you want to give them the contact if anybody wants to join the group?
I'll give you my email and my phone number both actually. The email is drlang770@aol.com. drlang LANG 770@aol.com. And my personal phone number, don't give it out to more than 1,000 people, 347-432-3777. 347-432-3777.
Okay, thank you. So that's any way you want to get into the WhatsApp group. Tzvi will be happy to include you. So with that, let's go to page 143. Let me sum up what we're learning. We're learning in Ayin Beis, he was talking about the second type of bittul of Oyer. After the first type of bittul, first Eifen, we call it type or level of bittul, of selflessness, that the first level was that Oyer is not tefes smokim in the presence of its source, it doesn't have any inner value. The second level is in the mitzias of Oyer itself, it senses and knows that it does not have any existence of its own, its entire existence is due to its source. And if without the source, it wouldn't exist. So the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab added in a parenthesis, Yesh Leimer, that this level, B'nivroim, in other words, in Aveda, what is it? And this is where the Frierdiker Rebbe is elaborating the few lines from the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab on page 1157 in Ayin Beis, volume 2. Here are 7 pages of elaboration that began on the top of page 139. The Yuvan Zebe Muchash Kameshu Ba'aveda. That this bittul of Nivraim comes through his bonanus. In Oyer, it's not through his bonanus, obviously, because Oyer, that's its natural identity. But in Aveda, what do we learn from Oyer? Oyer teaches us that the contemplation of Mo Rabu Masech Hashem or Mo Godlu Masech Hashem. So the contemplation, when you contemplate on the Tzva HaOretz, which is the creatures of earth, the earthly creatures, and Tzva HaShamayim is the celestial, heavenly, or the heavenly bodies, you come away with an understanding that it could not exist and could definitely not perpetuate without a source. And we've been talking many different aspects of it, beginning on page 139. Where we are right now is the key point, is that both of them are kayomim beyond their nature. They both perpetuate. Since they're both gvul, whether it's the earthly creatures or the heavenly bodies, they're gvul. Gvul is not bligvul. So where do they have that perpetuation? Why don't they die out, either individually or the species? You see, the creatures of earth die out as individuals, but a species continues. The same, it's for Shemayim, it's even more hafladik, even more wondrous, because even though it's the finite creature with parameters, it's a large creature, large creations, but yet each one of them does not die out at all. Be'ish, it's kayomim be'ish, individually, as well as not just kayomim, chazokim kiyemi borim, they're as strong in same intensity as it was day one when they were created till this very day. And that which will conclude after 6,000 years will be Chad Charuv. That means it will all stop. That's also due to God's will. So where does this power come from? So he says this indicates on the Koyach HaBligvul that only godly energy, divine infinite power can give the Tzva Haaretz its perpetuation in species. But as he said, so what we've been learning on page 142 and 143 is a lengthy discussion how on its own it's nifsad, which means it's perishable. Nifsad means it's ultimately will erode, decay, deteriorate, and die. That's what a physical or any creature that is limited. The reason it doesn't is because there's a koyach, a higher power of the divine that gives it the power that creates it and energizes it and sustains it without any change. Like he said at the bottom of page 1, for their hilucham, their orbit and movement does not shift at all. And also their very power is as strong as it was the day they were created. Okay. So we are now on the 6th line on page 143. And he said, and the fact that it, again, after 6,000 years, that's kachurotz nabeira. Then he brought the pasuk Sulu Shamayim Einechem. I never had a chance to look it up, to be honest, but he brought there the pirush that to bring a proof. He said Kashamayim Ka'osha Nimlachu, that Shamayim like smoke basically dissipates. So he says that was a proof that as soon as God wants it to disappear, it disappears. I still have to look inside how the pshat in the pasuk. The Rebbe, it says in the Maimer, it says Pirush Rashi. The Rebbe explains it's not Pirush Rashi. Ulay tzarich li is the Pirushe, because obviously Rashi doesn't say this. But again, I'll get back about the pshat in that. Okay. Hashem zeh atzmei moving the ifin kiyum atu b'keich bli gvuli hamachayu mekayim esam tomid. That's where we stopped. So we're still in the middle of the discussion of what the contemplation of thinking about the celestial heavenly bodies, that does something in context of that, the reflecting the divine, awesome divine power. Earlier we learned that the other things that Tzavar Shamayim teaches us more about the echus, the personality, and what behind the divine. Not just that there is a lukus that and achdus and hashgacha pratis, which even creatures of the earth teach us, but that there's also something about the divine personality. We also learned that Tzva Haaretz teach us that everything is godliness, and Tzva Shamayim teaches that godliness is everything, just using different expressions. And he gave the example earlier also of the difference between koyach ha'maisa and koyach chochmas ha'maisa and chochmas ha'nefesh. That Tzva Haaretz teaches more about chochmas ha'maisa, the wisdom in the so-called craftsmanship of creating something. The chochmas ha'nefesh teaches you something more sublime about the nefesh, whether it's nefesh ha'adam, or in this case would be more about the personality of the creator, not just about the wisdom within the craft itself. That's just summing up what we learned earlier. So now he's going to continue to explain how the Tzva Shamayim, when we look at the celestial bodies, how they tell us, Shamayim Mesaprim, remember Kveit Kael? So the earthly creatures also tell us a narrative. But now he's talking about a deeper narrative that tells us more the depth. As a matter of fact, he brought from the Zohar. This is where it all began. The Zohar Mesaprim, from the word that it doesn't just tell us a story, it illuminates for us. And he said two types of illumination, Er Yasher and Er Chezer, like the difference between a hot coal that's fanned and the striking of a flintstone that elicits sparks. He didn't explain the details, but it could be that we'll understand it from this whole discussion. So we're talking about Hashemayim Mesaprim is continuing. What is the story and the illumination that the heavens tell us, which means the celestial bodies? So right now we've established, it tells us there's a koyach habli gvul that's moving and sustaining and perpetuating the celestial bodies. There should be no change in them, exactly as the day they were created, which is clearly a koyach that's higher than they themselves have, because nothing gvul has bli gvul in it on its own. Okay, so now he's going to continue further in this contemplation. Now he says, Dihine, hal galgalim hem gufim rabim. Because now,
The Horus in the bottom is the Rebbe?
years,
The Horus in the bottom is the Rebbe?
yeah, of course. Yeah. And I learned all the ha'aras that we inside already.
Because
I learned all the
Rashi
ha'aras
says, all I
inside.
talk no, because I looked in the Rashi there, you see there's something, but the Rebbe writes, all I talk the Pirush. I looked in Rashi just now.
Well, obviously, maybe the
And
Rebbe doesn't
Rashi
see
said-
what you see in Rashi.
That's
I
why I
told you, I
asked,
looked
this
it
is the
up
Rebbe,
now.
yeah?
I want to look myself. I'll look it up and I'll tell you what I say. But the Rebbe clearly says the Pirush. It's the Rebbe's thing. So maybe because Rashi, from Rashi, you can't bring a proof to this Maimed here. Maybe that's not a word. Well, I'll look inside. You want to read the Rashi?
I could read it.
Read the Rashi. Let me hear.
Rashi said,
Just read the words.
דבר אחר שמיים ואורץ ממש, וכן פסרוינוי, שאו עיניכם והביטו אל השמיים ולאורץ, וראו כמוהם חזוקים ובריאים, ואף על פי כן יבלו, וצדקוסי וישועוסי יהיו לאוילום, הרי שצדקוסי בריאו וחזוקו יסר מהם.
That's what said Dover Acha. What's the first Pirush?
The first Pirush Rashi is saying about שמיים כאושר נמלוכו סורי ציבויס האומויס שבשמיים. נסבלבלו.
I will look inside. It's a long Rashi. Let me look inside and see why the Rebbe feels that Rashi is not a proof for what he wants to say here. Clearly, the Rebbe says that. Okay, we'll get back to it. Okay. Now, so I'm going further now. Dehine, because now Galgalim. Remember the Galgalim, I explained that Torah astronomy, there's 9 Galgalim. There are 9 spheres, like 9 wheels. Think of it like 9 concentric circles of 9 atmospheres. And each one contains different heavenly bodies. The Galgal Hasheni, I believe, is the moon. There's the Galgal Hashlishi, is the sun, I think. I don't remember right now, but the Rambam spells it out in Hilchos Seder Torah. So Galgalim, he says, Hem Gufim Rabim. There are many bodies. They consist of many bodies. The Galgalim. Asher kol echad mehem yesh le hiluch v'sivuv miyuchad mechavere. Each one of them has its own unique orbit or movement and orbit different from chavere. In other words, like think of it how we know the planets. They all have their own orbit. That now one orbit is not alike the other in their speed, in their and other factors of their orbit. The imzeh, and yet each one, even though they're different bodies, meaning different entities, together with that, we see that they're all organized and coordinated in one system, one pattern, one system. In other words, they're not each one doing their own thing. There's a fundamental design and coordination among all the orbiting celestial bodies. Which they designate the different times and itim and zmanim and seasons, kvuim that are set, that are set umugbalim and limited day and night. For example, the sun and the moon. So even though according to Torah astronomy, it's not the sun and the moon, it's the Galgalim, but for all practical purposes, the sun and moon's orbit. So they designate day and night, and we know it's completely organized. The sun and moon are not attached. There's no string that attaches the sun and the moon. And yet they have a coordinated effort that designate the sun will rise a certain time, which we know when. It will it'll shine on the part of the hemisphere that it shines until the shkia, when it begins to set, till finally till it becomes completely dark. This is not a random thing. It's not like a loose cannon a free radical. It's a designated orbit that designates itim uzmanim, which are times and schedules and seasons. The yem alayla, kayetz v'cherev, same thing. Summer and winter, the 4 seasons. He's speaking about only 2 of the 4, but basically summer and winter. Again, it's all predictable. It's all organized. It's all expected. It's not any surprises. We know exactly when the kayetz will come and when the cherev will come, which again is dependent on the different orbits and the angles of the orbit. Remember, it's not just the orbit, it's also the angle of the orbit, etc. V'shinei avirim, and also the shift of avirim would be here temperature. The keir v'chem, of cold and heat. Ba'arbet kufas hashana. Okay. So he says, Kayetz v'cherev as a season, v'shinei avirim, the keir v'chem, cold and hot, ba'arbet, the 4 seasons during the year, which of course adds also autumn, fall, and spring. Aviv and stov. So bottom line is that all these galgalim and all the celestial bodies, each one is a separate body. He says with a separate thing, yet kulam muchavanim. They all are organized and coordinated with one another. Asher behechrech, this compels us to say sheyeshnu mi shehu keshem machlichem lanhoga hazeh, that there must be some force that binds them and compels them to this governance, to follow this pattern of behavior, to this behavior. In other words, if you saw, for example, a bunch of different objects that are not connected to each other, and they're all working in tandem in a coordinated way, whether you see it or not, it tells you that there must be some coordinator, like a conductor or like a captain of a ship. And obviously the same, and we have to say, because now you could say, 1 second, maybe that conductor or that coordinator is the koyach in the nefesh itself. It's the nefesh and koyach. Each galgal has its own spirit and power source. In every sphere and every star or planet, koyach also can mean a planet. So he says, he's saying, no, you cannot say it's coming from within each of these celestial bodies. It has to come from outside of them. How do we know? The force, the power and the nefesh and the spirit within each sphere, within each planet or star, you can't say, you could only, it can only govern and rule that particular sphere for in that particular planet. Asher hu b'teiche, in which that spirit then forces in. In other words, the force and spirit within the sun governs the orbit of the sun, but it doesn't govern the orbit of the moon or the orbit of other planets or other stars or other other entities. Through its own nefesh and koyach, you can't say sheyiskasha, that it binds itself and it connects through it with the galgul zelose. In other words, the souls, the spirit, each of them are not communicating with each other, so it's not due to that koyach. galgul zelose. V'lo yayidei zeh yi haseder v'hamishter sheyishmer kol echad sivuvei. And not through this koyach and nefesh within each body, celestial body, causes the order. Mishtar is like the governance or the control. Sheyishmer kol echad sivuv, that each one should follow exactly its orbit. And it should remain constant in its particular location, which means not just the orbit, but also in its particular path. Each planet, the sun, the moon, all the stars, all the bodies, each one has their location. They don't change locations. The sun doesn't suddenly move into the orbit of the moon. and the moon doesn't move into the orbit of the sun. They remain in their particular pattern, their particular trajectory. That this order should be always preserved, should always be maintained. In the world, and each one should function with their particular function in a tmidistic way, in a continuous, consistent manner. This is all a negation. That the fact that all this is happening, this whole coordination you just described, its location, its orbit, the lack of change, you cannot say it's due to the nefesh and koyach within the particular body. All you can say that nefesh and koyach controls that body, but it does not create a coordination with other bodies. That's basically what he just said, summing it up. Friedrich Rebbe continues. Seemingly, there may be a mokum leimed, there may be a svara to say, there may be a theory, you could ostensibly, how do you say that in English? That there could be you could theoretically say perhaps, he's coming, remember, the case he wants to make here is that there's a God, that the creator is the one that's coordinating it. So first he negated that the coordination can't come from each body its own and needs to be a force outside of it. But now he's saying maybe there's another way to explain it, that the coordinator is the Galgal Ha'elyon Hanikra Galgal Hayemi Shekol Galgal Kfuyim Bei. I'll explain what that means in a moment. Let me just translate. Maybe you could say, Yeshmokim Leimer, there's a theory to say, a possibility to say, that the one that does coordinate is taka not each Galgal itself, not each body, each sphere, but it's a Galgal Elyon, there's a higher sphere within, all the spheres are within that one. And that's called the Galgal Hayemi. So the Rambam, when you go to the Rambam, you'll see there's a Galgal Rishon and Sheni and Shlishi and Revi. And then he says there's one Galgal, there's one sphere that everything else is within it. So if you think of it as concentric wheels, like a wheel within a wheel, he says that Galgal b'teich Galgal. They're not separate spheres. It's literally like concentric circles. And these wheels are turning. Within them are different celestial bodies. So he's saying maybe the outer Galgal, which he says, Asher Kulam, Hanika Galgam Shekola Agalgolim Gfuyim Bei. All the other spheres are established there. They're all within that one Galgal. So maybe the Galgal Hayemi, which is outside of all the others, and they're all within that outer sphere. In other words, that outer larger sphere, within them are all the inner spheres. Maybe that's the one that coordinates. That's the L'cheri Yeshmokim Leimer. Vim Kein Neymar. And based on that, if that would be the theory that he's now positing, if that's the case, we would say, the Nefesh HaGalgal Hazeh, Hu HaSevavim Kulam, Ki Ish Echad Al Kavana Achas. So we could theoretically say, the nefesh of this galgal, the nefesh meaning it has an intelligence, it has an energy. Well, it doesn't say intelligence. Let me strike that right here. It makes a gishmak of this intelligence. But forget about the intelligence. It has a nefesh, meaning it's not just some inanimate force. It's not just a stone. It has a nefesh and energy. So you can say, Hu hasevavim kulam. That's the one that causes them all to orbit in their particular way. Ki ish echad. Like one organism, like we said before, it's all coordinated. Toward one objective, toward one end. So why can't we say that? Aval be'emes, says the Friedrich Rebbe, but in truth, you cannot say that. You can't make that argument. You hypothetically, yes, it's a svara, but you can't say that. Why? Dehine emes hadover. Asher kol hagalgalim sevim al hagalgal hayemi. The Rebbe says maybe it should say al yedei hagalgal. Kenira tzarich al yedei, not al, because what's al hagalgal? Even though before he says kfuyim boy, so you could bedechik, you could force it and say all the spheres they orbit in al, meaning in the galgal hayemi. But the Rebbe says no, it's al yedei galgal hayemi. The Rebbe says, let me just finish, and then you'll please comment. Okay, let me just finish. Galgal Hayemi.
Al
That's what
Yedei
the Rebbe says. So therefore, meaning that through the Galgal Hayemi is the one that causes. So that's true. Friedrich Rebbe is saying that indeed is true. However, Aval im zeh hari ein zeh shem dvukim v'adukim boy k'moy evri ha'odam b'guf ha'odam. So while it's true that all the orbits of all the like he says, all the Galgalim, Sevivim, Al Yedei, they all orbit through the Galgal Hayemi. That's the one that's causing them to orbit. Nevertheless, they're not attached. Dvukim means attached. Adukim means even stronger than attached. They're attached and bound, completely integrated, like the Evri Adam, Begufa Adam, like the limbs and organs of a human being in the body of a human being. In other words, yes, you could say that all the Galgalim are within that Galgal Hayemi. The Galgal Hayemi, why it's called Yemi, by the way, is because it makes one sivuv, it makes one long orbit every day, daily orbit. Regardless, the point is, so yes, it's causing the
same
other
Galgal.
caused by it. However, you can't say that they are attached to it like that type of coordination that one body has different limbs. It's not that connected. So it has an impact on them, but you can't say that the Galgal Hayemi alone is a good enough reason to explain their coordination. You can explain their orbit, but not their coordination, is what he's saying here. Let me just finish, and then we'll comment, because there are a lot of people listening, and I want to just keep it order. If someone has a different way of understanding it, or question or comment, please, but just let me finish the idea. The
Galgal Hayemi only. Every day you have a new Galgal.
I just asked that. Let me finish the piece so we could learn it once. Then we can go back, and if you have any comments, we have patience. Please, just let me finish the idea. The begufa adam, in the human body, kol ha'ivarim adukim yardav v'kulim yardav hem guf echad. All the limbs are attached. They're all intertwined and attached. Like v'kulim yardav, all together, that constitute one body. You say a human body, you don't say in a healthy human body that it's a sum of the parts. You say it's one body, consists of many different limbs and organs and parts and components, and they all work as one body. That's one body. By the spheres, it's not the case. They're not like one organism. Each of them is a separate guf. It's like different bodies, different human bodies, not like the limbs of one body. And the proof of that is what he said earlier, because we see they're different in their orbit. So they're not like two human bodies. You can walk down one street, I walk down another street. Each have different journeys in our lives. The limbs in the body all go with the one body. But the Galgalim, even though yes, they don't work that way. Each one has its own orbit. So if that's the case, the Rambam says in chapter 3 of the Hilchos Yisei Torah, I mentioned before, Ayin Beis, Galgalim Tsevivim and Ma'ariv Lemizrach, the Galgalim orbit from west to east, and there are those that orbit the other way around, from east to west. As it's known, the seven planets. Each one of them has a known orbit and established mukhlat, meaning consistent, mukhlat determined and established orbit as on its own. An orbit that's not similar to the orbit of another planet. So therefore, then it can't be all one body, because each one has different orbits. It's like would be like two people walking different directions and having each one their own particular orbit. Because if that would be the case, if they're all one body, how could one part go this way and one part that way? That would be like a human body. One leg goes this way, one leg goes a different direction. And indeed, they actually go in opposite directions. This goes from east to west. And this one from west to east. So all this, we must say that they're separate bodies. Only thing you could say is that when you combine them all together, you look at one big picture, you join them, they're like one body, one human, I should say, one human. The galgal zeh k'mo hareish v'galgal zeh k'mo ayin. So in other words, there are separate entities, but there's something that is causing them all to work as one entity. One galgal is like the head, one galgal, one sphere is like the eye in the human body, u'ke'in he'varim begufa adam, like the limbs in the human body. Each one has its particular function. And all of them together are like one individual, one person. Page 144, same thing with the spheres. It's also like an example like this. So one second, you just said it's not like a body. Now he's saying it is, so he explains. In the gufa adam, in the body of a human, they're all interconnected, the limbs. Mashenkin bal galgalim hem gufim v'vdolim zemazeh. By Mashenkin the galgalim, the spheres, the celestial bodies, they are separate one from another. They are separate. So why do you call them adam echad? Because they still function and they still work in a coordinated way. It would be like different human beings all working toward one end. So we still have to understand what makes them coordinated since they're separate bodies. So you can't say that the energy of the Galgal Ayemi is the one that is causing these orbits, these different orbits. Each nefesh of each celestial body, it is the one that causes the orbit of its particular sphere, according to the rules, according to the laws, the law that God imbued in it, that God instilled in it. Whether from west to east, or from east to west. So the question comes back, the initial question, so how do they all turn and orbit in a consistent way in one order, meaning all coordinated, and toward one intention, one objective, without any change at all? Because you can't say that separate bodies, which are not connected, nothing is tying them together. There's no bond and no attachment. There's no strings, there's no glue, there's nothing that connects them to one to the other, not in their bodies and not in their nefesh, not the body of the celestial body, not its energy. That should bind them together toward what's objective. So where's the power coming from? Like it is with people that are separate and distant from one another, different people. That they should all gather together in one place and one time. Or they should have a collaboration, that each one of them should do a particular function and connect and collaborate with the function of another. And all of them together, join together and create one pa'ula, it's like a project that many different actors, many different participants. That's not possible to happen on its own if you don't have a manig, a leader that organizes them, that coordinates between them. He's outside of them, and he's the one that organizes and collaborates and coordinates between them. And the same thing is with the spheres, just like it is with human beings. The Chol Galgal de Nafshe, the Rebbe says Chol Galgal Nafshe below. Chol Galgal Nafshe, Manig is Galgoli Levad. Each Galgal itself, each sphere, only controls and governs its own sphere. It doesn't have any connection and attachment to the nefesh, to the energy of another sphere. That the second sphere also has its own power and strength that governs only that sphere. And nevertheless, we see that all the spheres are governed, and they move. They move toward one objective. They're all working in a coordinated way. To the point that by all of them working together, coordinated, Yushlam ha'anhoga shel kiyum elam is the fulfillment of the actualization of the governance and the behavior of sustaining this world. If they didn't work together, the world would not be sustained. You need them to work in a coordinated way. And this is the conclusion. So we must say, if that's the case, that the one that binds them together is not them. They can't do it themselves. But rather, it's a koyach elyon, a higher power that's separate from all of them. This is the infinite power, an infinite power that binds and attach and connects them. Even though they're separate bodies, one from the other, nevertheless, the power, the infinite power, machabram yachad, bind them together lekavona achas, toward one intention. V'zehu hashamayim misaprim, and this is the story that the heavens tell. Hashamayim, from heaven, shem gdeli hanevroim de kayomim beish, talking the celestial bodies that are sustained, perpetuate individual, each one individually. From this we know the power of Bli Gvul. So besides the fact, the power of Bli Gvul, that we see that they perpetuate and never diminish from the day they were created and don't die, even though they're Gvul. That tells us Bli Gvul, but now we added another thing that we learned, the fact that they coordinated together has to be a force that's outside of them. Why does it have to be a Keach Bli Gvul? That needs to be discussed, because the Cheder Bli Gvul can explain why the perpetual Kayomim Be'min or Kayomim Be'ish. But why the coordination, you could argue, is also coming from an outside force, but maybe it's a Keach Gvul. I want to think about that. But here, I did the whole piece here. I wanted to do it in one flow because it's one continuation. But now I shall stop. And if anybody would like to comment or have any questions or any points you want to make, here's the time. Please feel free to do so.
One thing is about the Galgal Yomi. This is every day the same Galgal, or every day you have another Galgal?
There's one Galgal. The Galgalim don't change. The sun doesn't change. The moon doesn't. Galgalim are there. They're permanent Galgalim in the heavens, actual physical spheres, according to the Torah.
Another thing, in Gufa Adam, you have also different functions, like Mizrach L'Mayrav, Mayrav L'Mizrach, the eye is doing that, the stomach.
Did you hear his explanation?
Yeah, so I want to know.
Yeah, but if they don't have, no, you can't have one foot walking to the east and one foot walking to the west. The body is one body. It's all going in one direction. He didn't say they don't have different functions, but they're all adukim ukshurim yachad. You don't see that. The Galgalim are separate. The Galgalim are like different bodies. Anyway, just read it. I just read it at length. Did you have this question before we read it, or you have this question after we read it?
The whole entire time, but you did not want to interrupt.
So you know what the problem is? You probably didn't follow because you kept the question in mind. He answered that. He explained it. The Galgalim are like different human beings. They're not like one body. They're different human beings. They coordinated. That's the whole point. They're coordinated, but they're different bodies that one is completely not connected to the other, except through the force outside of them that connects them. Like the fact that different human beings work on one project, you need a director, a coordinator for that, a conductor. So he didn't say that the limbs. He said clearly, yes, the eye and the head and the heart all are different functions. No problem. But they're all working as one physical body.
Und der Galgal Elyon, what is this doing?
It's very hard for me to answer this because we just learned it inside. Maybe you should read it inside.
At black
Follow the
for
recording.
second.
I'm not sure you're asking me literally what he just discussed inside.
My telephone black froze for a second. Maybe I missed that. My question is, what is the Galgal Elyon doing if it's separate gufim, separate people? What is the function of the Galgal Elyon?
So look in the Rambam, he'll tell you. It's not so relevant to this discussion here. The Rambam discusses it. He gave them Maramokim. What he said here is that Kulam Sevivim ala Galgal Ayemi, because the outside Galgal surrounds you. You have to look in the Rambam. It's gonna just confuse matters here. It's not Snagayas to this discussion here. But one thing is for sure, it does not have the power to connect them all because they're different bodies. And the Galgal Ayem is also a body. Remember, it's yet another body. It says, yeah, okay. What he says in the Rambam briefly is that the Galgal Ayemi turns once every day, and within it, all the other spheres also turn within it. But to understand what that means, you have to learn the Rambam. It's complicated. It's not so black and white. It's not so simple. But that's the Galgal Ayemi. Because it's an outside Galgal, all the spheres turn within it, but they also have their own orbits and their own turns. So it's like different spinning wheels with one wheel turning all the time on a daily cycle. All the other Galgalim also are affected by it, but they have at the same time their own orbits as well. This is what the Rambam explains. But what it doesn't answer is the big question is the coordination that they work like one entity. Okay. The Rebbe also has a footnote in the bottom of page 143 of the Hine al Galgalim. He says, "Barichus al derech kol zeh, the Sefer HaKira lach tzemach tzedik chelik aleph perik tez ve'elach." So if you really want more discussion, in the Sefer HaKira of the Tzemach Tzedek, section 1, chapter 9 and on, he explains this at length. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. So now he's going to go back. This is the whole long discussion, how the contemplation of Rabu Masecha, Magodla Masecha, in the earthly bodies and the earthly creations and the heavenly bodies come to tell us that they don't exist on their own. There has to be a higher power. The second Eifon Habitl in Nevroim, of the second Eifon Habitl of Oyer, how it reflects in Nevroim. So now he's going to conclude, and this is now back to the language of Ayin Beis, page 1157. Yeah. Just want to make sure. 1155. Okay. So here's how he concludes now. Im Kain. Now that we've established how the creations of earth and heaven tell us about a force that's outside of them, that keeps them moving and existing and sustained and so on. Im Kain kol kiyum hanivroyim hu mitzad rotzen habayri yizbarach. So we know from this that the kiyum hanivroyim, which means the sustenance of creations, of all the creatures, is due to the rotzen, the desire, the will of the Creator. Ukesher hanivra margish, asher kol mitziyuse v'kuyume hurak mitzad hurak rotzen habayri. When a nivra feels that its entire existence and sustenance is only due to the desire, the will of God, of the Creator, that nivra will be in a state of bittul within himself, because you sense that your entire existence and your sustenance is not from you, it's from something higher than you are. So there's a bittul involved. If you felt that you were the creator, or you didn't feel there's another creator, so then you could be a yesh. This causes a bittul within the creature, or the creation, or the person who's contemplating on this. This is an example. Habitl ba'er, the bittul in the air, the second type of bittul in the air, the bittul that comes, that it recognizes and senses that its existence is not from itself, but only due to idmim, only due coming from its source. Okay, well then, what's the difference in the bittul of Nevroim and the Eir? Rak shebenivroim. Only difference is the Nevroim in a bitla ze nikle bitla yesh. This bitla is called bitla yesh because the nivra on its own doesn't feel this unless it contemplates through Aveda, and then it comes to a state of recognizing the yesh I am is nullified, because in truth is I'm really a creation. My creation and my sustenance comes from a force greater than I am, the creator. Uba'ir, shu mitzias ruchni, the Eir, which is initially a sublime and ethereal existence, meaning it's not a yesh. Nikre bitl ba mitzias shalei. This is called, the bitl is in its very existence. The mitzias of the yesh remains a mitzias of yesh. But bitla yesh, now this mitzias of yesh exists, senses that it comes from a greater, higher power, the desire, the ratzon habayra. Whereas Oyer, being initially a mitzias ruchni, it's a bitl in its very existence itself, because it never has a yeshus in the first place. Its whole identity is only reflect its source, and it only is a reflection of its source. Now, he doesn't explain more detail than this. If you remember in Ayin Beis, we discussed this at length, and it was not so clear, if I recall correctly. I'm going back there. On page 1156, so he said, so there in Ayin Beis, I'm just looking on page 1156. Here was the language. He said like this. Actually, what did I say? 11. I said 1156. No. 1158. Sorry, 1157. My mistake. 1157. Here's what the Rebbe Rashab said. If you want to look with me, maybe it's good to look because the comparison is interesting. Ubitl zeb nivroim yesh leimer on page 1157. Shazel kafi I do the kiyum kol nivroim rak mitzad ritzenis bar. Hu kumoy tzva mayla shekayomim beish v'tzva mata shekayom b'min. Ze rak mitzad ritzenis bar. Hu kidu b'vur v'okem acher. The im yeh ba nivra nirgish kein ein eich shekol kim etzisu rak mitzad rotzen aber yeh b'chinas bitl ba'atzmei. Here, the lashon is that he actually is bitl ba'atzmei. Here he says kasher hanivra. The Frierdiker Rebbe changes im. There it says if. Oh, you know something? They wrote the im with an aleph. Can im with an ayin be taich kasher? Rab Shlomo.
No. Impossible.
With an ayin, you can't taich im with to mean kasher, right?
No.
Okay, so it's interesting. In Ayin Beis, he says im
You have to give an
example.
example. You have to give an example. Where are you?
Okay.
I see the 1157, but where are you on 1157?
The line starts b'mokem acher. 10 lines from the bottom. 9 lines from the bottom.
Oh.
So what basically in Ayin Beis, he says, Im Yeba Nivra Nirgish Kain. In the bottom there, the editors made it into an aleph. I'm thinking that maybe the Frierdiker Rebbe changes the im to kasher, means it's not a if, it is when they will, not if they will. But then he says again, im yeh nirgish by emes echshe kom tzivus kem reberatzen elyon. Hazeh kedugmas habitul b'zeh shem okay.
If you want to say the chasher, then you have to say ve'im sheyihiyeh.
Okay, I hear. Okay, this concludes the second Eifin HaBittel. And the next class, we're going to go to the third. You know what? I will learn the end of the Mimer tomorrow, maybe. I want to stop now, but I'll learn the end of the Mimer tomorrow. And then we're going to go back to Ayin Beis, to the third Eifin of Bittel. Okay.